Basically, those foods are sparing your digestion, and they're also putting a fresh blast of good bacteria into your guts every day, and that's what you need.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A Foundation for Wise Traditions and Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 44, and my guest is Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A Foundation. Today's topic is hot, hot, hot. It is principle number 5 from the Wise Traditions diet, that traditional diets have a high content of food enzymes and beneficial bacteria. What's so exciting to me is that the general population is getting this right now. Kombucha, yogurt, sauerkraut, they are all the rage for all the right reasons. Sally will explain why the bacteria and enzymes are so critical for our health and what food sources are the best vehicles for them. Before we dive into the conversation, let's take a moment to recognize our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported by Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products offering fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Visit greenpastureproducts.com. And listeners like you, your encouragement and financial support help keep the podcast on the air. Thank you so much. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Oh, thanks, Hilda. It's nice to be back. And love doing these podcasts with you.
Oh, it's really fun, and we're reaching so many people.
I know. It's like so many thousands of downloads. It's great.
Exciting. So we're going to continue our series going through the Wise Traditions dietary principles, and I think we're on number 5 this time.
Yes, and why don't I just read it?
Okay.
And then we'll jump in here. So, primitive and traditional diets have a high content of food enzymes and beneficial bacteria from lacto-fermented vegetables, fruits, beverages, dairy products, meats, and condiments.
So how did this principle come about?
Well, it all came to me, it was a confluence of things. When I was writing Nourishing Traditions, I had the wonderful book on enzyme nutrition. And he was looking at the importance of having enzymes in your food. So you get enzymes in certain types of food, like raw honey or yogurt. Or he didn't really talk about lacto-fermented foods. I don't think he knew what they were, but he was talking about the importance of enzymes because they help you digest your food. At the same time, I was reading a book in French about lacto-fermented foods. I guess it was the first one ever written on this subject. And she was talking about things like sauerkraut and fermented vegetables, fermented beverages even. And I thought, well, yes, that's where all these enzymes are. And then this was just when we were getting into the human biome and the importance of gut flora, and I realized that these lacto-fermented foods were not only giving us enzymes for digestion, but also the good bacteria.
And the thing is, if you look around the world today, you can see that many people groups have these lacto-fermented enzymes as a part of their diet.
It's actually universal. I don't know of any culture that did not have fermented foods. And I think it's important for us to pinpoint what we mean by lacto-fermented foods. Yes, because it's very confusing. So there's basically 2 types of fermentation. There's a type of fermentation with yeast, and the yeast eat the sugars in whatever it is, the grape juice or whatever, and make alcohol. That's alcoholic fermentation. Bacterial fermentation, that's as bacteria eat the sugars, and they make lactic acid. Okay, and that's lacto-fermentation. So both alcohol and lactic acid are preservatives, and they will preserve the food. But of course, the lactic acid doesn't make you drunk. So to give you an example, you can chop up cabbage, and cabbage, when that juice comes out of the cabbage, it's full of lactic acid. Lactic acid is just an ubiquitous organic acid. And some fruits and vegetables have more of it than others, and cabbage is really high in lactic acid in its juice. So you cut the cabbage, you pound it in whatever way you want, and then you add some salt. And salt is very important because it prevents bad type of fermentation before the good fermentation can get started.
Interesting.
And you put that in a jar and then close it up, or people used to put it in crocks, or in some cultures they put all this in the ground. There's many ways you can do it, and that lactic acid increases, and it supports the proliferation of enzymes and good bacteria. And so you end up with sauerkraut, which is completely preserved. It'll keep for years, actually.
Yeah.
And it's got lactic acid in it, which is actually a good thing for us to eat, and then has lots of enzymes and lots of good bacteria.
And people back in the day didn't know necessarily the health benefits, or did they, of these foods?
Well, they knew that they needed to do this to be able to keep the foods over the winter, okay?
Uh-huh.
But they also, I do think, recognized health benefits. Certainly the old sailing ships would take barrels of sauerkraut, and they knew that if they had that sauerkraut, they wouldn't get the sickness that sailors got, which was scurvy, of course, on these long voyages. So they did recognize in some undefined way that there were health benefits.
And people are recognizing this today more and more, aren't they?
Well, this is what I love about the work we're doing. I often say we're showing the scientific validation of traditional foodways.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can imagine somebody in the 1950s going to a primitive tribe and seeing that they threw their fish in the ground and it became semi-rotten. They would think this was a terrible thing to do and tell them not to do it because it was, that fish would be full of germs, it would be putrid or whatever. Now, just now, we are realizing that this is a good thing to do, and the science is validating that. And that's what I love about the work we're doing. More and more, we're seeing the science validate the traditions.
Oh, that's so encouraging. Yeah. And even if they're not immediately, sooner or later they will.
Yeah, well, that's what we think. I think all of these traditions will be validated. Someone was telling me about a tradition among the Australian Aboriginal people that they ate a certain food with a mussel shell, and they would not eat it any other way but with the mussel shell. Well, who knows why, but I predict that one day we will know the reason, that there will be a scientific reason why they use the mussel shell to eat this particular food.
Oh my gosh, I see what you're saying. We don't know why yet, but it will come out.
But let's not just dismiss it, because a lot of times this wisdom of the traditional cultures is deeper than we know. And that's the wonderful thing about Weston Price. He never dismissed these things.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to know what they believed and why, how they ate things, why they ate things, and he respected that. He didn't try to dismiss it.
Now let's talk about how these foods appear in different cultures around the world. Can you describe some of the lacto-fermented foods?
Right. Well, certainly we have Europe, and in Europe, the main lacto-fermented food was cabbage. So that was sauerkraut. And we find that everywhere from Rome to England, really. Mm-hmm. Cabbage is something that's easy to grow. And then also the milk products. So the yogurt or the buttermilk or whatever they use in Scandinavia, it was fill milk. Called fill milk. Mm-hmm. They have special ones for Russia. So I think those are the two main ones for the whole European continent. When we go to the Orient, they have lacto-fermented pickles of all types. I mean, they pickle cabbage leaves, they pickle cucumbers, they pickle eggplant, they just pickle everything. And they eat that, as we say, in small amounts with each meal. And that's particularly important in the Japanese diet because everything else is cooked. So this would be their only raw food. And I like to call these foods super raw foods because they're more than raw. They're multiplying many times the benefits of raw. We look at Korea with kimchi. It's like the national dish of Korea. Mm-hmm. So going to Africa, Africa is the mecca of fermented foods. They ferment everything. You saw how they fermented the milk in the Maasai culture. They ferment all their grains. They ferment usually by making a very sour beverage. But they also do things like wrap the cooked dough in banana leaves and let it ferment. They're just the masters of fermented food. There's nothing that they don't ferment in Africa, I think.
And I wonder if it's because the heat would cause things to spoil.
Yes.
So it was
yes.
a way of preserving their food.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a book I just acquired about fermented foods of the Sudan. This book is 400 pages long, so there's a lot of fermented foods there.
Ah.
And in the Sudan, they have about 3 months of rain and harvest and plenty, and then everything is fermented. They ferment bones. They ferment the skin of the animals. They ferment all the meat. I mean, everything is fermented to get you through the rest of the year.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Then if we go to the South Seas, we find the fermentation of the cassava and the tubers. They were put into a hole in the ground and fermented. Eskimos, frozen north, they fermented the fish. They fermented birds. They would dig a hole and put a whole seal in there and let that ferment. They were really the masters of fermented food as well. So it's everywhere. I mean, I can't think of an exception to this rule.
Tell the story of the dogs that would pull the sleds.
Oh, yes.
I love that one.
Yes, so the Eskimos or the Inuit are very observant of nature. And one of the things that they observed was that their dogs, if they gave fresh fish to the dogs could not pull the sleds all day long. They didn't have the stamina. But if they gave the fermented, semi-rotten fish to the dogs, then they had the stamina to pull their sleds all day long. So they knew that these foods gave them strength and stamina. And the reason they do is because they spare your digestion. I read a very interesting statistic recently that 70% of the total energy of our body goes into digestion.
70%.
70%. So if we can even lower that a little bit, we have a huge increase in energy for ourselves. And so if you're eating fermented foods full of enzymes, good bacteria, and these fermented foods are like pre-digested foods.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yes, they're pre-digested. So you have a lot more energy for yourself.
And people, even anecdotally, let's set aside all the scientific evidence, but anecdotally will report some of the things you're saying, more energy,
yes.
Better function of the body, and so on, right?
Right, and many other things as well. I had a woman come up to me at a talk, and she said she had suffered from irritable bowel syndrome for 20 years. She had tried everything short of surgery, and she started to eat sauerkraut, real sauerkraut. And in 2 weeks, she no longer had irritable bowel syndrome. It was completely gone. You're not supposed to use the C word. You're not supposed to say cured. By the way, talking about sauerkraut now, you can buy sauerkraut in vinegar, and you can buy cucumbers pickled in vinegar. But that's not lacto-fermentation. That's not going to give you the benefits. You want the real raw sauerkraut. You can do pickles. You can ferment a lot of things this way. But it needs to be lacto-fermentation.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
Now, how would someone know if they just picked it up off the grocery store shelf, if it were fermented or simply in vinegar? How would they know?
Well, if it's canned at room temperature, then it's vinegar. Okay? If it's in the refrigerated section, then it's more likely to be lacto-fermented. But you need to read the label, because if it's got vinegar added, this is not lacto-fermentation.
Would it say live bacteria cultures?
It might
if
say
it were
that,
fermented?
yes. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there's any standard for how they have to label them. By the way, I mentioned cabbage, and the juice is full of lactic acid. But some of the other things that you ferment, I recommend adding about 2 tablespoons of whey to your jar, which is full of lactic acid, and it helps you get this process started. Because a lot of things that you ferment, you don't want to pound. Like cucumbers, you wouldn't want to pound them to get the juice out.
No, they'd be all mushy, right?
Yeah, right.
I wonder how many of our listeners make their own fermented products.
Well, I hope that a lot of you are making them. They are really fun to make because you're kind of an alchemist in your kitchen. And even today, my kids are out of the house. You can actually buy all of these products now. There's many, many little companies making them. I still do my lacto-fermentation because I just enjoy doing it. I like seeing the change and the magic that occurs in the jar.
It's amazing. I guess it reminds me a little of farming because you do your part and then nature kind of takes over.
That's right. What we're doing is working with nature here. And we're preserving food in a way that increases the nutrient value, increases its liveliness, or whatever you want to say, its livingness. Whereas most methods of preservation, most modern methods, decrease the nutrient value and kind of deaden the food. But there are ways, and this is the way that you preserve food, that actually makes it more healthy for you.
We want to pause now and thank our sponsors. Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products produces fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil in a variety of flavors and liquid gel and capsule form. They also offer organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, and a complete oil blend that includes all of the nourishing oils. Lastly, they produce skincare balms and various byproducts that enrich the soil and feed of farm animals. Go to greenpastureproducts.com. And listeners like you. Kelsey gave us some love on Twitter recently. She said, devoured all 42 episodes of the Weston A. Price Foundation's Wise Traditions podcast. Absolutely fascinating. I'm hooked. Thank you so much, Kelsey. We appreciate your support. Any tweet or Facebook share or review on iTunes helps spread the word about our valuable health information. That's why you're calling it a super raw food.
Yes.
Because, for example, if I were to eat cabbage in a coleslaw, just shredded, nothing fermented about it, that will be more work for my body to manage than sauerkraut, for example.
Right. Your body has to do more to digest it. And, cabbage is very high in vitamin C, but when you make sauerkraut, the level of vitamin C goes up by 10.
Really?
Yes, it's tenfold higher. A lot of minerals are released. B vitamins go up. In some of your fermented grains, lysine goes up, which is important. Yeah, and then also many of these foods have anti-nutrients. Cabbage has goitrogens in it. And these, I won't say they're completely neutralized by the fermentation process, but they certainly partially neutralize.
Now, what do you think, Sally, of people who want to drink their enzymes? I'm thinking particularly of kefir and kombucha that are popular drinks right now.
Yeah, this is a great thing to do. We have all sorts of lacto-fermented beverages that are available commercially now, and this is a wonderful idea. This is what you find in many, many cultures. Here's another example for you. The American Indians fermented the corn for 2 weeks. They wrapped their cornmeal. They cooked the cornmeal. They wrapped it in a corn husk and fermented it for 2 weeks before they made their tortillas with it. But they also took that raw fermented cornmeal and put it in, it was cooked cornmeal, but it had then been fermented. They put it in water and let it ferment some more in the water, and that made a beverage for them. And they thought that was very healthy, refreshing. So, we need these beverages. We need an alternative to both soft drinks and alcoholic beverages. And that's what these lacto-fermented beverages do for us. We have kombucha. We have something called kvass, which you can make with bread. You can also make it with beets. We have lacto-fermented ginger ale and a lot of fruit drinks that you can do lacto-fermented also.
Is there a drink called True or Pure or something like that? I've heard of something else that's similar. I guess there are a lot of them. That's what you're saying.
Yes, well, we have one that we sell in our farm store called Zivot, Z-I-V-O-T, made by a Russian woman. And it's a water kefir drink. It's just wonderful. It's a little fruit in it and it's fizzy, very refreshing. So we can have healthy soft drinks. That's another thing I love about the work that we're doing. We don't say you can't drink soft drinks. We just say there's actually healthy soft drinks. And so you have this wonderful alternative. We don't say don't eat fats. We say, yeah, you can eat the good fats, not the bad fats. And the good fats are mostly animal fats. A lot of people say you can't eat salt, but we tell people you need salt, but you need the right kind of salt, so unrefined salt.
Wow, and these real foods are so satisfying and nourishing.
Yes.
I love it. I love what you're saying about drinks too, because our family finds kombucha as like a little treat. You know, you
Yes.
feel like you're having a soda, but it's so good for you,
Yes,
and it makes you feel so good.
yes, yes. My grandsons drink kombucha. They call it buchi, but they love it. Yes.
Is it okay for children to have some of these lacto-fermented foods? How
Oh
early would you
yes,
start them on it?
they should have them, and I think you can start pretty early before they're a year old. You know, in Africa, one of the first foods given to babies is what they call pap, and it's the fermented corn. And it's actually slightly alcoholic. And the missionaries, when they went, they made them stop doing this. But the Africans recognized the fact that these gave a lot of protection to the baby. And I was reading something recently where they were making a fermented product, and they were saying, this is good for our babies. We need to give this to our babies. So it inoculates the gut with all the good bacteria that protect them from the diseases of Africa. And now, isn't this a better way of protecting our children everywhere in the world than, antibiotics or whatever?
Smearing their hands with, the antibacterial.
Or spraying mosquito spray on them or whatever.
Yeah.
Our bodies are simply amazing at how much protection they can give us, how strong they can be, if we just know how to feed them. And we don't need all these other things. Of course, there's no money in it.
Right, so nobody's going to be promoting that as much. Well, yeah, I've heard them say that even some of the enzymes and the healthy bacteria that are in these lacto-fermented foods are protective against cancer.
I'm sure they are, because anything that spares your digestion is going to help your body fight off cancer, because then your body can make cancer-fighting enzymes instead of digestive enzymes.
And it just seems so rampant in our society today that
I know.
you turn around and children are fighting cancer, as you know.
I know. Well, there's many components of the traditional diet that protect people against cancer, but certainly this is one of them, the lacto-fermented foods. Basically, those foods are sparing your digestion, and they're also putting a fresh blast of good bacteria into your guts every day, and that's what you need. Now, the objection is, well, these things don't get past the stomach acid. But they do get past the stomach acid. They're buffered, and they can get past.
Mm-hmm. And I have heard we have more bacteria in our bodies than cells, right? I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure if I was right.
Yeah, 10 times more bacteria than we have cells in our body.
Wow. Yeah. And so what you want to do, like you said, is repopulate, kind of shore up the good guys so that they're strong.
Right. And that, you have a kind of biofilm lining your complete intestinal tract, the whole small intestine, and that is 85% of your immune system. That biofilm will keep out pesticides, will keep out heavy metals. It protects you from mercury, from absorbing mercury. So you have a tremendous asset there, it's almost like a shield, a protective shield, as long as you support that bacteria. Don't eat the wrong things, and then eat the right things that will support that, the growth of the good guys.
And I think this is such a great message for any young parents listening right now, because they want to nurture their children, protect their health and their wellness, and this sounds like a great way to do it.
Well, and one of the things we teach, as you know, is that parents need to prepare for conception, prepare for pregnancy, and one of the things that you need to do during that period, usually a 6-month period, is eat these lacto-fermented foods, get your gut and your body populated with the good bacteria. And the baby picks up the good bacteria in the mother's birth canal. That's its first, inoculation.
I see. So you want to prepare ahead of time as much as possible.
You want that birth canal populated with good bacteria and not with a lot of candida and yeast and fungus.
So I'm a kind of gung-ho person, as you may have noticed.
We know.
But what if I went overboard? Is there ever too much fermented food in the diet?
Yes, there is, and that's a wonderful question. And I've seen people with a whole plate of sauerkraut. Now, that is the wrong way to eat sauerkraut. In Chinese medicine, you would say that sauerkraut was a very cold food. And that's okay. We need cold foods, and you eat these fermented foods in small amounts as a condiment with the rest of your meal. They balance any enzymes lost during cooking. They're also very helpful to help you digest fats. And as you know, we're a very high-fat diet.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not to be eaten in huge amounts or as your only food.
Mm-hmm.
We had someone visiting our store, and he bought a jar of sauerkraut, and he said, "This is my lunch." I said, "Are you kidding? It's not a good lunch. You need more than that." So,
what could happen? What would be the damage or the problem?
Well, I talked to a woman the other day. Now, this is not eating the foods, but she was taking a lot of probiotics.
Okay.
And she had kind of wiped out her gut. And the interesting thing was, she said, I'd become very constipated, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I can't predict what the consequences would be, but again, it's like everything else. You eat some of this food, but shouldn't be your only food.
Well, it reminds me of principle number 4, which is talking about the importance of raw food and cooked food in our diet. So here there's going to be a balance.
Yes.
But we definitely need more of this rather than less in general terms. When you look at the standard American diet, this is very needed.
Yes, and I think a good idea is just have a little with every meal. A tablespoon. There's more good bacteria in a tablespoon of sauerkraut than there is in a whole jar of probiotic pills.
Wow.
Yeah.
A tablespoon.
Yes, I mean, it's amazing.
And it's less expensive than the probiotic
pills. Oh,
pills.
Absolutely, yes. And it tastes good. When you're eating a rich meal, especially with a lot of fat or sauces or something, that sauerkraut really just makes it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, well, this makes me want to go out and drink some kombucha, have some sauerkraut. Although in Latin America, something that's like that is curtido, which you can also make the same way, right?
Yes, that's the spicy South American or Latin American sauerkraut, and it's delicious. And there's a recipe for it in my book, Nourishing Traditions, and a number of people are making it now. So this would be great.
Oh, excellent. Well, I won't overdo it, though, Sally.
But now, just one thing I would like to say about kombucha. Kombucha is a lacto-fermented beverage. It's made out of sugar and tea, and you need to be a little bit careful. There's many, many brands now available for sale. Some of them are too sweet. They haven't really fermented long enough. The kombucha should be sour, and that means that the sugar has been transformed into lactic acid.
How would you know that? Just by taste?
Just by taste.
Okay. Yeah. So as we wrap up, is there anything you would recommend that the listener do? What would you recommend that the listener do to improve their health?
Well, I think because of what we're talking about today, I think learn to eat sauerkraut. Get the real lacto-fermented sauerkraut. Use our shopping guide. There's many brands available. Most health food stores do carry them now, even Whole Foods, I think. And just learn to eat a little bit, even if you just want to start with a teaspoon with every meal, and you'll find that you digest things a lot better.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sally. I've enjoyed our conversation.
You're welcome, Hilda. Thank you.
My guest today was Sally Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Learn about the resources she shared by going to the westonaprice.org website. Click on About Us for the whole list of dietary principles, or simply go to the podcast page on the website and go to show notes for episode 44. Oh, and a big shout out to Podcast Village. Thank you so much to Marcus and to Sarah and to the whole team for all your help. Love you guys.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.